I'm just glad you can't superimpose anything on me.
Yeah. Oh, but we can. Hold on.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
No draw.
On this. What? On what users? On mine? I've done draw before. Oh, it's not supported on Joe's?
What?
What? Why am I flipping back and forth every time I click that? That's weird.
I don't know. Why aren't we recording yet?
We are recording. You missed it.
When did you go live?
I just wanted to catch you being stupid, and it didn't work. I missed it.
Nice try.
Uh-huh.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the LinuxInstalled.net podcast. We are on episode 122. This is being recorded August 12th of 2014. My name is Joe Leuzzi, and I love doing the intro. Brian, take over.
Okay, I'll take over. Fine. We're doing such a wonderful job. Why do I want to interrupt?
All right. With me, as always, is one of my faithful co-hosts. Since Brian's on the screen, we'll go to Brian Wagner. He's on my screen, at least.
Hi, everybody.
And our second co-host, who has been with us for a while now, Walt Jevack.
Hello, everybody.
We'll see how long he lasts. He's coming up on that limit, Joe.
I don't know. Because
I had to give up ice cream to be here today.
he's been consistent for a while. I mean, even when one of us isn't here, he's usually
more consistent than the two of us, to be honest.
There
with
as
you,
well.
But...
Just about. So I don't know. I think we can add him to the list of credits finally. If you have not already done that.
Yeah, I did that a while ago.
Yeah, check back in January.
Oh well, there you go. That's
he is one of my
right.
He is one of my friends, so he kind of got preferential treatment and got put to the credits a little faster than normally we would have. So, yeah. So in the show notes, you'll all see that I have managed to kill yet another phone. I don't know how.
How? What do you don't know how? How do you not know how you kill a phone?
Because it's not totally dead. I spent an hour on the phone with Verizon last night trying to...
That's what she said.
I'll never be able to show it, but anybody who has an Android phone, especially one on Verizon, I think Sprint does the same thing. In the little bars, when you get the bars, normally if you get 4G signal, which means you have a data connection, or 3G signal, it says 3G, 4G, 1X, something to tell you that you have a data connection. Sunday, everything was fine. Monday, I get down to the client side I'm at and go to play some Pandora while I'm working, and I have no data. That's really weird. Try restarting my phone. I try restarting my phone. Nope, that's fine. Oh, well, I'll look at it later. And put my phone down and just for the whole rest of the day. Now, I normally get really good 4G where I'm working because it's in the middle of Canton, so, it's got a lot of cell towers. It's very well covered. I come home, or I'm on my way home, picked up my daughter from my mother-in-law's, said, okay, grab your Moto X and look and tell me if there's a 4G next to the little bars. And she goes, yeah. I said, can you get to the internet? She goes, yeah, I was just looking at Instagram a couple seconds ago. I'm like, okay. I said, well, then my phone's acting weird. So I did all kinds of stuff to it, couldn't get it to work. So finally, about 11 o'clock, about 10:30 last night, I called the wonderful folks at Verizon Tech Support, and they spent about an hour with me and then finally decided they were going to replace my phone.
Did you try to do a factory reset?
I did not do a factory reset. She had me do a cache clear. We talked about doing a factory reset. She said if the cache clear didn't do it, the factory reset's probably not going to.
Probably not going to.
She said it's...
Android's like Windows. Reboot the damn thing. Factory reset it. It'll fix it. Hit F8. Go into safe mode. You got an F8 on that phone?
I don't know. But it was so weird because it was working fine. I wake up, I go to work. I didn't even notice that it... Because at home I was on the Wi-Fi, so it didn't... I wasn't using wireless data.
Boot into single user mode.
I did that, actually. I didn't know there was a single user mode, but believe it or not, there's a safe mode on Android phones. and I booted into safe mode to make sure there were no other applications that were interfering. That was a new trick I hadn't known about before. And nope, that wasn't it. Then we cleared the cache partition. That wasn't it. And yeah, all in all, it sucks because I get a new phone and they're gonna drop it off tomorrow, and there isn't gonna be anybody here to get it, which means I'm probably not gonna. I'm gonna have to like go to the FedEx office.
And who said porn sites can't root an Android phone?
That's what I'm telling you. Well, if they were a porn site, though, they wouldn't have killed my data. They would want my data to work. They might have tuned my data. I might actually have gotten like really good 4G speeds.
Maybe they sucked your data down so much that it just killed it.
I mean, I was looking at everything. I was like on the Verizon side. I'm like, okay, well maybe I went over my data limits. I'm like, I don't really know how, but okay, maybe I did because I have 6 gigs of data and I barely use 4 every month. And with my daughter not going to school, we aren't even using that much.
Yeah, with my Nexus 4, every now and then I won't get cell data, but all I have to do is put it in airplane mode and then switch it back, and then it's like, oh, you wanted to do that, and it kicks it back on. That's not too frequently, though.
Yeah.
Anytime Android acts up, I just reboot it.
Yeah, and I normally do too. Let's see, I didn't try putting it in airplane mode. I don't know why I didn't try putting it in airplane mode. Anyway, so what have you been up to, Walt?
We're gonna have to take you back to a flip phone, feature phone. You're no longer allowed to have a smartphone. Your geek phone has been revoked.
And I was reminded yet again when it happened that a smartphone is not at all useful when it's not working. When it has no data. If it has no data, it's useless.
Can you connect to Wi-Fi?
I could, and I should have just asked my customer for their guest Wi-Fi access. But I didn't. Because I was getting a new phone tomorrow, and then I realized nobody's going to be here tomorrow, so I won't be getting
pre-sign? Sometimes you can go to the tracking and pre-sign, put a thing on the door.
Yeah, I might do that. So.
Or I could wait for you.
Don't you have work to do tomorrow?
Yeah, probably.
Weren't we talking about that before the show, that you had to do actual heavy duty work?
I know, these last 2 weeks suck. Real work.
You had to do like 80 hours of work in the last 2 weeks?
Yep.
Jeez.
Stupid school.
Stupid school starting up. So, what else have you been doing besides actually working at work?
I got a couple minutes to play around with the new elementary OS. It's Freya, I guess. Freya. They put the beta out.
It's Freya for you and you and you?
And so, what's so great about... They're still calling it Luna on the website.
Yeah, and it's not on the main page. You got to go to like some... I can't remember if they put it on the blog or the news, and then there's a different download link that you can pull it from.
Journal. Oh, there's Journal. Oh, you're running beta 1.
Yes.
Wow, you are Mr. Bleeding Edge.
Yeah, that's something to play with.
That is out there.
Yeah, it's been about a year, I guess, since they've done any updates, and their whole marketing is it's supposed to be really pretty and user friendly. Kind of looks a lot like a Mac, basically. So figure, what the heck, give the new interface a try. Every now and then, Brian knows, I get the itch of, man, I've been staring at the same screen with these same features for too long. There's got to be something else cool out there.
Too long, 2 weeks.
Yeah, sometimes.
Well, that's how I ended up on Mint 17. That and something broke, and I needed a patch, and the patch wasn't available for this line. I had to go upgrade anyways. But
Brian, what have you touched recently that you haven't broken?
No, actually, I fixed 17. That works. Actually, almost everything else works, with the minor exception of something isn't configured right with auto login for ADFS, and that's a whole Windows thing. Windows is flippin' annoying. But we already know that because that's why we're on a Linux podcast. So, Joe, what have you been up to with Linux this week?
Working and working and working. That is pretty much about it. And most of my week has probably been doing more WebSphere stuff than Linux stuff, to be honest.
Wow.
So I haven't had a chance to play much at home between the other podcast and this one and work and everything else going on in life right now. So I work with it every day. And it's not just a job like you say, it's an adventure.
It is.
Doing a lot of app config updates and across our environments for all of our new applications that I've built servers for. And I have like 2 environments to go.
You're so special.
Well, the fun part is I'm moving JVMs from like, I have like 4 servers, and I'm moving JVMs from like, let's say, servers 2, 3, and 4 to 1 and 2. So I'm having to rip everything off and relay everything down and redeploy applications, and it's actually so far gone okay in the several environments I have done.
And that's that.
So let's hope stage and production go just as good, because those are the only 2 left. I will be snapshotting.
Hosed stage in the worst possible way.
I will be snapshotting those servers like a son of a bitch. Watch me forget to snapshot them now.
Yeah, I know. I know. Actually, I'm expecting that. I'm expecting you to come back next week and be like, crap, I forgot to snapshot them, and now they don't work.
Well, if it's worked in several environments so far and it breaks in these, then there is definitely a huge issue. So,
well, typos happen. Just remember.
I'd rather find the issues now when this goes live actually in a month. So now I guess is the time for it to break. When things go live in a month, I don't want shit to break.
Yeah, that's true. It is the time to do it. Cool. All right, so I think, are we done? Did anybody else have anything else exciting they did?
No. How about you, Brian? What did you do other than breaking phones?
I think I finally have all my DNS mask stuff working. I'm going to actually open source the script I wrote, or scripts that I wrote, to convert bind files to DNS mask and DHCP files to DNS mask. So I'll have something up on the GitHubs, because I don't really have much on the GitHubs. It's not all that exciting, but at least it works.
Nice. And those are on the Pogo still, right?
And they are on the Pogo. Yes, and the Pogos are working well. Once I got images and everything that works, it's just kind of rinse and repeat. It's pretty cool. Very nice little toys to play with, and very, very, very low power, which is what I like. And what else did I do? I think that's about it. Yeah. It's still recovering from being sick, so I haven't had a lot of energy. So trying to get my...
You're sounding much better.
Yeah, I got to go back and get some more antibiotics today, so... Yeah. Remember, folks, if you don't need to take the antibiotics, don't take the antibiotics. Don't ask for antibiotics when you don't really need antibiotics, because they make things antibiotic resistant, which is what I'm fighting right now, is antibiotic resistant strep. So I get a second round. Yay! But yeah, I think that's it. I didn't really do too much. Oh, I went and saw Guardians of the Galaxy. Well, you need to go see it, because you'll really dig it.
I know. Maybe this weekend.
That's good.
I've
Your wife
heard
will like it too.
mostly good things.
I think it's storming up here. I hope we don't lose power.
Okay. That's Joe's just out to curse himself for the entire week.
I'm sitting here and I keep hearing something, and I'm like, I think that's thunder out there, because I have my drape closed, because with the green screen, I can't have the drape open because if too much sun gets in here, it starts casting shadows. So my lighting needs to be perfect and not change. So, all
right.
But I keep hearing things outside, and it does not sound good out there. So let's carry on.
Every time I start to talk, are you going to start talking, or?
I think so.
Okay.
So, sure? Brian.
All right. So there was a topic from last week's show notes that we passed over, and we moved on to this week because I, wanted to be done. And that's drop-down terminals, because Walt thinks they're cool. I haven't played with them enough to know. So this was another Walt find for last week. Walt pretty much carried me last week. I put.
What am I?
You didn't really bring anything to the show until you showed up to talk, and then he did most of the talking. I'm the one who edited the podcast. Other than us talking about your green screen.
Wow.
Yeah, he had the fancy screen.
He had the fancy screen. He was showing off, and at least this week his hand doesn't disappear when he puts it to the right. So. Anyways.
No, but I got a finger that can fly by real quick.
Yeah, I know. Well, tell us about drop-down terminals. Why do I want one? Why are they so cool?
I don't know. And they're not. Maybe we didn't copy all the notes, or I didn't pull the notes in from last time. But I was watching, listening, don't remember, to some podcast, and in passing, someone mentioned they wouldn't be able to go back to Linux life without their drop-down terminals. And I was like, what are you talking about? So after doing a little research, basically, if you're in shell a lot, instead of having to actually launch terminal or some application, you can hotkey, and a terminal actually just kind of slides down from your screen, similar to how, and one of them's actually named appropriately so, like in the old Quake games, when the menus would slide down from the top for all your different options, and then slide back up again when you were done using it. So after doing a little research, it ends up there's probably, I don't know, maybe a little more than a half dozen variants, depending upon the desktop system you're running. Guake, Guake, being the GNOME version. Then it's I don't even know how you would pronounce it. Yakuake. Yake, maybe, for KDE.
Yakuake? Yakuake?
Yeah, I have no idea. And then it ends up like XFCE's terminal has a command line switch that loads it in drop-down mode. And then there's a few other projects that I guess haven't been developed in a while. There should be, I don't know if Brian's going to leave the link in the show notes, but...
Yes, I am.
Yeah, there was an article that people posted, all the different variants. So, and I was thinking about it. I was like, I do almost 90% of everything I do in a terminal, and I just always keep 3 or 4 terminals open up on my screen and just click, on whichever one I need to use. But when you just want to do something fast or quick, or there's actually even some terminal applications that if you run them in a drop-down terminal, format themselves differently. So you can get like cool status bars and system information or graphs, kind of like HTOP, but a little bit fancier. Some of your media players, like your command line based MP3 players and whatnot, have different interface options. So so this is something kind of fun and cool. And now when I hit the F12 key, a little screen just slides down and you're in terminal, and when you're done, it slides back up out of your way. At least that's how I set mine up.
I will have to play with that some more. And
that does sound cool. I want to try that as well.
There are some things where I think it would be really useful, like after the show, I do all the processing of the podcast and do all that. But the first couple of steps of that is ripping it from the video. And I'm always opening a window to do that. It only takes a few minutes, but if I could just drop a terminal down, kick it off, and then not have to close that terminal, I guess that would be useful.
Yeah, and there's macros I guess you can do, and a whole bunch of other transparency settings. There's all kinds of fun stuff depending upon which one you pick. I haven't.
Because I'm like you, I have
dive into it, but
yeah, I have 3 or 4 different windows open most of the time. Now, right now, those are all logged into my various Pogo plugs, but
right. Yeah, that's what I do too. I have my main, desktop, and I log in all my servers, and they just kind of sit there until I need to do something.
Yeah. Cool. So what were you saying, Joe?
I would like to try that as well.
Is that really all you were saying? I'm sorry.
with minimalistic enthusiasm.
Oh, hi, Stewie.
Hey, Stewie actually didn't fade into the background. I was kind of worried that your cats would half disappear. They would look really weird.
No, he's black, so he'll just kind of block part of the screen, I guess. Carry on.
All right, we'll move on. So, Joe brought up the wonderful world of Docker again.
Yes, I did.
And I'm not sure. I mean, you've had to have been on at least one of my things about Docker. But you asked me this morning what my thoughts were on why and when to use Docker, right? So I thought, hey, this is a great quick topic for the podcast because then I won't go on and on about it. But my rules. So I've been playing with Docker on and off for quite a while. Docker is really cool technology if you're looking to isolate an application. If you, like, I was thinking about using it to put DNS and DHCP into on my Raspberry Pi before I started trying to do stuff with the Pogo plugs. And the cool thing about it is it kind of gives you a lot of the safety sandboxing features of a virtual machine without all of the memory and CPU overhead of a full-on machine. So you basically only take on a slight overhead above, and I haven't really measured it, so I don't know, but a slight overhead above whatever it is, whatever the application is that you're running. So if you're running something small like DNS or DHCP, you just have that plus, like, let's say 5%. I don't even think it's that high, but let's say it's 5%. So you don't really gain a lot of extra memory loss from it, as compared to if you tried to run a full virtual machine, which you would probably want to give it at least a gig of memory. These applications probably only take up, I don't know, 128 meg. So it's quite a significant savings in memory. It also allows you to build an environment and then pretty much just run a couple of commands and you can pull that environment to different places. There are some negatives to think about before you run off and decide to do something serious with it. One of those being, right now it only is supported on Ubuntu and Red Hat. Like, really nothing else as far as I can tell. There's no BSD release for it. There's no... well, there's other Debian flavors, but it's got to have Debian, and then you have to pull in the Ubuntu packages to do the file system that they use, because they use this well, it's not proprietary, but they use this file system, this special file system that allows you to take snapshots. There's also limits to how many of those snapshots you can have. So you can only have, I believe it's 40 of them, which is really kind of limiting. It's very limiting. Because it takes a snapshot every time you do a step. So I thought back to how we had set up a bunch of the WebSphere stuff and all the automation that we had done. Every script or every step that you would do would end up being a snapshot. So you would do a step, it would take a snapshot. You'd do the next step, it would take a snapshot. Now you'd put all this into a file and it would build it all without you really having to pay attention to it. But every time it finished running a command, it would take another snapshot and cut it at that point, so that you could go back to any point and doing that. From a development perspective, like when Tom and I were developing this stuff, that would have been awesome, because we could have gotten it to just do snapshots all the way up to wherever it failed, and then we could go back and say, okay, this is where it failed. For production environments, it's kind of cool. The really nice thing about this is you can restart one of these containers, one of these Docker containers, in seconds for almost anything. Because it keeps most of the stuff in memory when you're doing a reboot like that, so it just restarts the software. So if the software's got to load stuff, it doesn't. Now, it can take longer for the application to actually be usable, so if you were doing a larger Java application where it's going to cache a bunch of, let's say, database information into its memory, it's going to still take that time to cache that into its memory, but once it's done, it's done. Some other big advantages are for instance, different versions of WebSphere don't, unless you do it with a lot of effort and intent, multiple versions of WebSphere is not a fun thing to try to set up. This would let you isolate each one. They would never know that the other one was there, and you could run every version of WebSphere on one machine, and none of them would know about each other.
Now, would you say Docker is similar to, I mean, because WebSphere is almost, at a very high level, I guess you could say, it's kind of like a container like Docker, because you're running a JVM within WebSphere. So it's almost like a piece of middleware. And to me, Docker almost seems like another piece of middleware. Kind of. I mean, it doesn't have the same functionality as what WebSphere does, because WebSphere does have a specific functionality to it. But Docker is kind of just like a container thing that you're running things in, similar to like what you're doing with WebSphere and running a JVM in it.
Sure.
At a high level.
At a high level, any JVM-based
Right.
system, so Tomcat, WebSphere, WebLogic,
Yes.
all would be similar, but all of those things could have outside dependencies to other C libraries, SSL libraries, and that kind of stuff. If you put them inside of a Docker container, you're just separating them out so that they wouldn't. They would have whatever version the OS that you installed them onto had. And you wouldn't. You could put, like, you could continue to do OS upgrades, and you wouldn't have to worry about the containers, because as long as the container still runs, it's still running the same version of the libraries that it was on before you did your upgrade.
Right.
Now that's a blessing and a curse, because if there was a bug in it or something that was making it hackable and there was a security fix, you wouldn't be getting the benefit of the security fix either. So, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, from watching some videos earlier about Docker, one of the things that they were kind of touting it could be used for is if you were basically trying to run, let's say, you're a developer and you're developing for both Android and iOS. You'd be able to have those containers basically on the same system next to each other running, and neither would actually interfere with each other, and you'd be able to, just go about your work.
Yes.
Which sounded like a great idea. That you were basically sandboxing those two different types of environment on one box, and able to do whatever you need to do with both of them, and utilize them really easily.
Yes. I will let you go with that because I'm not really sure that iOS would work, but the Android.
They actually. So I was watching one of the Docker guys, and he actually said that. I thought.
Really.
I thought that's what he had stated.
iOS development required Mac OS.
That was my impression as well. But
maybe.
But you could do Android and not Android. I don't know. I mean,
it could have been one of those other languages, so it's not you're developing in something else that runs in an iOS.
Yeah, it could be.
Environment kind of thing.
But the example works, and that's definitely one way to look at it.
Right.
You can do it, and they'd totally be separated, and that is, regardless of whether it really works, that is a good example of a good way to use Docker.
Docker's available on Arch Linux too, by the way.
Okay, so that's new. It's hard to keep up with because right now, especially for the Linuxes, it should be available for all the Linuxes eventually. It's just they all have to port over that disk library is the big thing. That's the big thing that slowed everybody down, and I don't think it really slowed them down. I mean, come on, I don't even think it's celebrated a year.
I was going to say I think it's probably just coming upon its year, and one of the videos I was watching, the guy who was giving the presentation was asking if anybody was running in a production environment, and one person I guess raised their hand, and he was like, "Wow, you're kind of gutsy." So,
yeah, I mean, they just released at their conference this I don't know, a month and a half ago. They just released the 1.0 version.
Okay, so 1.0 is probably somewhat stable for a production environment if you needed it to be.
Right. If you want to buy support for the Docker company, which I don't remember maybe it's called Docker now. Everybody's been changing their names. If you wanted to, you can do that. I'll put a really good... I'll have to find it. I have a YouTube video of somebody's presentation that he went back and actually re-recorded his audio over the presentation because he didn't like the way it came out in the conference. So he went back through and talked through his whole presentation again, and it was really, really good at explaining what all to do with Docker, or what all Docker is, and what to do with it if you want something more in depth than what we've been talking about. As far as when and where I would use it if I want to run multiple versions of Java specifically, because that's what I know. And so I would want to run multiples. Where I probably wouldn't do it, I'm kind of torn as to whether I would want to do it with something as heavy as like Oracle or DB2. But if I tried it out and that all worked okay, I would probably want to do it with that for a developer. So I could combine Docker with something else, or just Docker by itself. Docker has this concept of a multi-part application. And you can set up each part. So let's say it requires a message queuing system, it requires a database, JVM, and a web server. You could create Docker instances for each of those and then combine them together in a configuration file and say, these things always go together. This server needs to get from itself to the ports, to these ports on the queuing server. The web server needs to get to the app server. The app server needs to get to the database server also. So here's how the ports all lay out, and you can set all that stuff up. What people are starting to do with it is then take it to that next level where it does service discovery, which has been the penultimate, wow, this is the way applications should really be written for the last 10 years. And it's actually finally starting to come through with stuff like etcd, and what's the other one? There's another tool out there that basically does service discovery. So these tools, Docker has built-in functionality to connect to these tools and register itself, the Docker image, with those servers. So I can have really complex applications in really complex environments out like in the cloud and have them all connect to each other dynamically based on what I've put into those configuration files. So it's getting pretty slick and pretty intense, but there's one other negative to it that's hard to get past, which is by default, there's no way to really log into the command line on it. So you have to start it with that capability, or you have to add like SSH to it to be able to get a terminal session on that machine. So it can be tricky. You can add files to it, you can remove files, you can look at files. You can do all those things with Docker commands. It's not as restrictive as it sounds, but it's not like just logging into the machine and looking around. You can. Now,
one of the cool things I was watching with the one video, what the one guy was doing was almost it's version controlling, where he was pushing and pulling, where it's almost using like a GitHub functionality. Yeah,
they call it the repository.
Yeah.
And yes,
which was really cool.
So they call it a Docker file, and that's what you use to build these custom images, these Docker images. And your Docker file, every step, it saves a version, basically. Then if you get on and do something else, like let's say you just have a base where it installs WebSphere and all the parts, and WebSphere, all the software, and the basic, and then you can have it freeze at that point where everything is installed, and then run another script that'll go out, pull that image, and start from that as its starting point, and then add in any configurations, applications, and other stuff like that, and have it kind of run those things too. So yeah, it's exactly like you said. It's very, very versioned. You can push the versions up to the repository. You can pull them. You can freeze them. You can.
Now, can you run your own local repository? Because it looked like he was using one that was pretty much accessible to the public. So he was pushing it up to almost like the Docker repository, which it almost seems like would then be accessible by basically the whole community. Can you run your own repository? I hadn't seen that, and I hadn't read anything about that.
Yes, you can. It's not all that difficult to set up, but it does require some extra setup steps. But it's not that hard to set up. And you have to do a little configuration on Docker to make it pull from there. What I've been struggling with, and I know it's possible, but I haven't taken the time to figure out how to do it. It is also possible to create your own base image. So without having to go to Docker to the community site and pull an image, you can like create your own Ubuntu or Red Hat or whatever you want image. It sounds like Arch is an option now too. So any of those. And I actually didn't know about Arch now that I think about it. But you can pull a base image off of those and kind of go with it from there. So yes, you can have your own repository. Yes, you can make your own images. You can customize any. You can start with their base image, or you can create your own base image. There's a new version of Linux specifically built around the concept of clustering Docker images together. It's called CoreOS.
I was reading about that.
It is super, super lightweight. So it basically, the only things it has on it is what's necessary to run Docker. There's no other fluff. There's no GUIs. There's no nothing on this. It's just what it takes to run it. It also, they've enhanced the way the system works, so there's actually behind the scenes separate partitions. So when there's a new update to CoreOS, there's enough disk space, virtual disk space, well, I guess it's real disk space. There's enough disk space there for it to bring down a new copy of the OS, and then it'll flip to it as soon as the OS is available. As soon as it's done downloading, it can actually, you can control it, but by default, it'll automatically flip over to that new version of the OS, restarting all the containers and everything, and bring itself up on the new updated version of the OS. So I had a CoreOS instance running. One of my virtual machines here was running CoreOS, and almost, because they were in that fast cycle spot right before a release, and I was running one of the beta builds, but they were literally almost every day it was getting an update. And I'd come down and do an uptime on it, and it's like hours. It's not even making it to days. They were pushing it out that fast. So it just depended on when I got on the machine to look at it. But that then lowers the overhead even further. So now you can set up CoreOS on a virtual machine, and they have a whole bunch of VM images for all the different VM flavors. You can put that down, log into it, pull your Docker images down, and you're ready to go. And it runs, and then it can restart your images. You can use that to connect. There's a couple of programs. There's one called Shipyard. There's a couple other Docker management tools which are there to let you connect to Docker and manage it like you would the VMware stuff. So you can control how much memory, you can declare applications with it, you can use it to manage the configuration files behind the scenes, all that kind of stuff. Sorry, I'm coughing here. And that kind of stuff. If you really want to play with it, I suggest getting a VM of CoreOS. CoreOS just did its 1.0 release 2 recently, and then running Docker off of the CoreOS thing, because it's super lightweight and it's very, very, very fast. And if you set up a bunch of them, you can actually cluster them all together, and it's almost effortless clustering between the different CoreOS instances. And then once you have them in a cluster, if there's, I don't remember whether it's 2 or 3, at a certain point, it'll make sure that, like when it does that automatic OS update, if you have a fast connection like at least Joe and I do, and you can download a gigabit or multiple gigabits. Well, 30 megabits versus 12, it's a little faster. But we could feasibly have all of them, like if I had 3 CoreOS machines, I could have all 3 CoreOS machines updating at the exact same time, and my bandwidth wouldn't even notice. And if they all got updated at the same time, if they're clustered, they'll all be smart enough not to take more than one down at a time. They'll all take turns restarting because they're talking to each other. And that's that's one of the features of the CoreOS stuff. I haven't spent enough time with CoreOS. It just blew my mind how easy it was to set up and how fast it was. And it boots, even off of a spinning disk, in like maybe 2 seconds.
Wow.
It boots that quickly.
Wow.
And then if you have Docker images on there, because they're Docker images, they all boot really quickly too. So you can restart the whole thing, like, have 6 or 7 Docker images going and restart the core OS, and it'll all be up in like 10 seconds.
That's crazy.
So it's
Cool.
very cool stuff. Is there any other questions?
No. I mean, but I kind of agree with you. From what I've watched today and what I've read today about it, which is more than I've kind of done before, I just kind of glanced over some of this stuff before. And you kind of played around with it way more than I have. I haven't even really looked at it yet. But what you had stated earlier, the way you were saying, it seems like it's a lot more feasible for development. From what I've seen about it and from some of the videos I've watched, I can definitely see it being used on the development side. From an operation standpoint, I'm trying to see where it would maybe fit in on from an operation standpoint, and I guess maybe I'm not thinking outside the box enough, but I'm just really struggling to see where it would actually fit in on the operation side. On the development side, I completely understand it. I think it's perfect for development. On operations, I'm just struggling with that.
I will find there is a Docker versus Chef presentation that I don't remember which company did, that they presented at I think a Docker conversation or somebody's conference. They did this presentation talking specifically about that because they were all ops guys and they were like, yeah, well, we kind of see the purpose for this for you guys as the developers, but and it might make our lives easier because we can just throw an image at you and we can make our tweaks to it and then push another image out and just say, go update the image, and you should be fine. Because the other thing is, too, is you can actually have files on the OS file system that Docker accesses. You don't have to include all your files inside of Docker images. So you don't have to do that. So that makes it even better for developers. Developers can have it on their own local machine.
Right.
And that kind of stuff. And then they can do the updates that you send them, and that's all good. So for enterprises, I think Docker is a harder thing to do an operational production environment for, because there's probably going to be some legacy system you have to connect to, which may or may not make Docker make sense. It may make it less appealing. Whereas a small startup or a company that is not dependent on legacy technologies, for instance, mainframes, DB2 on a mainframe, DB2 in general, because DB2 is just a big pig, and Oracle is a big pig. And if you just have large volumes of data where you need databases, it may make less sense. But the really fast restart capabilities of Docker does make it kind of appealing for doing production stuff. It's more of a tool that has more value for people that are doing continuous delivery and continuous integration to their production environments all the way up through production than it does somebody doing a traditional waterfall approach or non-agile approach to development, because you're not going to necessarily need the speed. Docker's big advantage is the speed. Pretty low impact on the operations of what's inside the Docker container, because the containers are pretty quick. But so there's negligible. I'm sure there's some, but I don't know. I've heard of people running production MySQL and MirrorDB and other databases inside of Docker containers because they can control them so well. They get the versioning basically for free when they want to do updates to the configurations and stuff. So, but yes, I completely agree. I struggled with it for a long time, just figuring out where I would use it. It was like, it's a really cool concept. What the hell am I going to do with it?
And that was one of the things that the one guy stated in one of the presentations I was watching. He was like, yeah, I know what some of you are thinking. This is just another container. We have like 14 other containers out there. And this is just the 15th one that's supposed to basically eliminate all the other ones, is what he had stated. And I was just like, And towards the end of it, I was like, I kind of see what he's saying, why everybody would be thinking that.
Yeah. I think Yeah, I totally agree with you. I don't know what else I was going to say. I think a lot of people got really excited about it and are still really excited about it. I think there's a good reason to. They took containers and actually, the Docker team took containers and actually made them really usable. Containers have been available forever, but
I think there's some niche markets probably that this will fit perfectly in. Mm-hmm. Kind of like some of the stuff you were saying. There's certain uses for this where it's going to completely excel. It's definitely not a blanket something that's going to fit every enterprise, every data center, or pretty much every shop. It's going to basically come down to what you were doing.
Yeah, it's not going to replace VMware, but you know what? For some application types, it might be better than VMware. If you thought about it, especially, I've been in environments before where Java applications generally needed somewhere between 256 and a gig or more of memory just for the application server. Well, instead of standing up a smaller Linux box, even if it's a VM, with like 10 gigs of RAM, stand up a larger one with 32 gigs of RAM, then you can run these in isolated Docker containers for the development environment at least, where you can throw 30 or 40 containers on there, and it only takes up the RAM it takes up. It doesn't take up, a whole machine. Mm. But they're very niche uses. I'm not... Like we talked about last week, Media Browser actually releases a version of their product for Linux on Docker in a Docker container.
Yep.
Which to me is far more useful. Like I wish more products would do that. I think it was Door-to-Door Geek was talking about it at one point, and he said he saw Docker containers as a way to do basically application packaging, except you're packaging the whole application. So the problem that you have with some open source projects, especially new ones, is they're not real good about documenting what versions of what C libraries you need, and you get into a whole bunch of dependency hell trying to figure out what they were doing or what they had on their machine that you don't have on your machine. So if the developers develop inside of a Docker container, they can hand you the whole container, and they can have whatever version of the C libraries they want, whatever version of the SSL libraries, whatever version of whatever library they want. They want 0MQ on there, and you don't want to be on that old version of 0MQ, you want to be on a new version. All of that stuff can be handled by putting it all in a container and deploying the container. So it'll make things kind of, I think what Stephen was trying to say on Door-to-Door Geek was, or what Door-to-Door Geek Stephen was trying to say was, it makes it pen drivable. So you can take a Docker container and use it like we do pen drive applications on Windows, where you just package it up and put it on a thumb drive. Where you could take a Docker image and put Docker images on a thumb drive, carry those around with you, and as long as you can run Docker, you can run the image.
Yeah, so. I think, were we talking about one podcast too, where like Turnkey was talking about using it as well? Because instead of having to virtualize the entire environment, now you're only setting up a Docker container for the one app that you want to try out, because you don't need the overhead of the rest of the environment anymore.
Yeah, they were talking about that on the one of their guys was interviewed on Floss Weekly probably a month ago now, and that's when I was talking about it. I think Walt and I think we were talking about it, and yeah, it totally makes sense to me. I mean, it would be smaller for them to release. It would be smaller for us to download and try out, and you could just stand it up, and it would be all isolated.
Yep.
Which would be very cool. If you haven't played with Docker, it's a very low-cost thing to get yourself into. It doesn't take a lot of effort to get it stood up. If you go to the Docker website, they have really good tutorials on at least getting your first couple machines up and seeing what it's like to be in a Docker world. There are some things that are still need a little better explanation, but it's still new. Like we said, I don't even think it's a year old. And they just released 1.0.
Cool.
There's also tons and tons and tons of tutorials out there. Mm-hmm. But I will put the YouTube links in the show notes. So Joe, you'll want to make sure you look at the show notes this week.
I will do that. Smartass.
All right. Does anybody have anything else?
Nope.
Nope.
So that does it for us this week. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter. We're at Linux Install on Twitter. You can check us out on the Google Plus community, http://google.com/+linuxinstallnet. And you can check out what Walt's doing over at Jevack.com, what Joe's doing over at whatimPlayingNow.com, and what I'm doing when I'm not doing Linux install, which is DevOpsMastery.com. Oh, and don't forget to check me out.
We'll check Brian out somewhere. Will he tell us? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if this makes it up to the stream since he started this.
Tune in next week for the same bad times. Same
And Brian's back. Brian, where can we see you?
Yeah.
You left us hanging.
I left you hanging, didn't mean to, but wow, that sucks. I had the Chrome version of a blue screen right there. People don't want me to talk about the fact that I'm going to be on Arrested DevOps next week, next Wednesday night on the 20th. What is it? 8 p.m. Central, so 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll be on there talking about the DevOps and talking about it from a sysadmin perspective. So, if you're looking for a DevOps and you don't want to just listen to the DevOps Mastery podcast, definitely check out Arrested DevOps. They're another good group of guys. Matt and Trevor do an awesome job. And I think that's it. What should everybody go do, Walt?
Go install some Linux.
Have a nice week, everybody.
Take care.